There is an ancient Indian saying that something lives only as long as the last person who remembers it. My people have come to trust memory over history. While history serves only those who seek to control it, those who would douse the flame of memory in order to put out the dangerous fire of truth. Beware these men, for they are dangerous themselves and unwise.
Hidden deep beneath the canyon walls of the New Mexico desert lies a mysterious ancient city, a place of magic rituals, astronomical alignments, and supernatural legends. This massive city was lost for centuries when its occupants seemingly vanished overnight, nearly 1,000 years ago. To this day, archaeologists and historians are unable to piece together exactly what happened here. So we traveled into the ruins, looking for any clues that will help us understand the true history of the canyon. What we soon would discover is a history far more shocking than anyone can believe. So join us for a unique look into Chaco Canyon, home of the Ancient Ones.
The Anasazi were an ancient culture that lived in the Colorado Plateau. No one knows why they built their fortified cities, but we do know that their entire civilization ended suddenly when they abandoned their homes. Some have speculated that the nature spirits worshipped by the Anasazi became destructive demons when the community ceased to maintain their sacred laws. These beings terrorized the population, often appearing to children before taking them away forever.
The ancient Anasazi people had superior knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, ritual magic, and some claim they also possessed supernatural abilities.
During research for our best-selling book, On the Path of the Immortals, I was given the unprecedented opportunity, really, to sit down with and to film Dr. Don Mose Jr., a third-generation medicine man who I met with for a large part of a day during our investigation, and he told me the oldest legends of the Anasazi, which he had been told by his great-grandfather, who likewise had been told by his ancestors, which included stories of the Anasazi turning to sorcery, to sacrifice, cannibalism, after they had lost their way and were driven insane by a reptilian creature, which they depict with a halo above his head, of all things. Images of that being are, by the way, included in the petroglyphs. And I believe that they likely attest to the fallen reptile or reptiles of biblical fame, which also misled humanity. He began drawing in the sand on the floor and reciting the first part of the story of the ancient Anasazi and how it had been repeated to him by his father and grandfather, who had also been told by their ancestors and so on, a legend that Dr. Mose alone had undoubtedly repeated hundreds of times before at the Navajo school. Now, since it was obvious to us that this Navajo historian was really indifferent to our camera and our recording plans, and in fact I could tell he was really uncomfortable with us putting him on film, but thankfully he let us proceed nevertheless. But I sat there and listened respectfully as he proceeded for nearly 2 hours to describe to this white man what's only ever been allowed a few times in history before, and that is the legendary stories of creation, of giants, of a great flood, of a reptilian deceiver, all from the voice of the nation's top medicine man. Dr. Mose even sang to us in the antiquated tongue of what I would call Old Testament history, paralleled in their earliest antiquity using the Navajo language.
For centuries, tribal elders have been telling stories of unbelievable supernatural events that occurred in the canyon. Events so shocking, the Ancient Ones carved pictures depicting these events into the canyon walls as a semi-permanent record of what happened here. The 15-mile-long canyon is home to over a dozen large complexes. The largest, named Pueblo Bonito, has over 800 rooms and sections that were over 5 stories tall. Tucked away on a cliff face hidden behind Pueblo Bonito, lies one of the canyon's most telling secrets. 3 feet carved into the mountainside with 6 toes each. Are these 6-toed carvings showing the feet of a Nephilim giant depicted in the Bible? From the Book of Chronicles, chapter 20, verse 6, quote, "And yet again there was war with Gath, where was a man of great stature, whose fingers and toes were 24, 6 on each hand and 6 on each foot, and he was also the son of a giant." Legends from all over the American Southwest speak of giants, 6-fingered, red-haired giants that used to terrorize these people. They speak of evil, cannibalistic giants that would terrorize the tribes with their hunger for human flesh. These giants are said to have inhabited these areas for thousands of years. Not only do they speak of giants, however, they also mention monstrous creatures that were summoned into the canyon. These creatures were carved into the canyon walls for everyone to see.
Not only did Dr. Mose substantiate the age-old and globally recorded story of those who come through portals and the impact that they have had on biblical and global history, past and present, not only did he weave Navajo Indian myths and legends seamlessly with our understanding of the 6 days of creation, the arrival of the Nephilim, and their connection to judgment by a global flood, followed by the repopulating of people around the world, and then a second incursion of the giants. But there were several instances in which, when I pushed Dr. Mose for greater detail, he would go off script, actually delineating from the official Navajo storyline to provide greater consistency between history and the way the Bible itself recorded certain events. For example, as Mose was following the official storyline, the one that you would get from the Parks Department in the 4 corners of the U.S., about how the Anasazi didn't disappear, but rather they slowly migrated out of the area and became the modern Pueblo Indians, I expressed doubts to Dr. Mose about that story. And he responded by grinning just a little bit and saying, "Well, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but," and then he proceeded to tell us the older stories that his grandfather had repeated about these mysterious people actually disappearing after they came under mind control from a reptile with a halo, this carnivorous creature, suspiciously similar to what I later described in the Path of the Immortals book as fiery seraphim, which comes from the Hebrew seraph, the Hebrew Old Testament, fiery serpent.
All throughout Chaco Canyon are these massive circular structures called kivas. The kivas are perfect circles that are built into the earth for the purpose of magic rituals, ceremonies, and religious practices. They were used extensively by the Anasazi, who, according to their own verbal history, used the kivas to summon monstrous creatures into this dimension.
Now, another case in point is when I told Dr. Mose what we had learned from the Apache about cannibalistic giants and then God destroying them in a flood. And he looks right into the camera and he says, "Oh, yes." And then he reaches over and he picks up this illustrated book that he had authored that's used in the Navajo Nation schools and libraries. And he opened to show us an artist depiction of a giant that had stood between 30 and 40 feet tall. And then he starts saying there was this time when the earth was infested with such great giants and alien gods that came down and destroyed and ate the people. Some of them were in human form. Others, he said, were monsters like human-animal hybrids, which I think the Old Testament also describes. And then he followed that story with the famous Navajo legend of the White Shell Woman, who gave birth to 2 of the most important characters in Navajo mythology, the twin miracle-performing sons, one of whose names literally translates slayer of alien gods, and his twin brother. And together, those two great warriors, killed many of the giants, hybrids, and the monsters that were destroying mankind. As Dr. Mose described these ancient tales, I couldn't help but think of David killing Goliath, and then later other giants with his mighty men. Then there was a point where Mose paused, and he said, when the Christian missionaries first came to America and told our people their stories of the giants and the great flood, he said, we smiled and let them know that we already knew these stories, that they had been told to us long ago by our own ancestors.
We know that the ancient ones used petroglyphs in order to document their history and events that happened to them. Petroglyphs like this, the spiral. The spiral is found over and over again in almost every ancient culture worldwide. The spiral symbol can be found from the jungles of Peru to the frozen tundras of Siberia. The spiral can be seen as a symbol of a portal, an interdimensional portal used by entities as a transport between worlds. This is evident by the petroglyphs and the stories they tell. Now, let's take a look at some of the petroglyphs we found during our exploration of Chaco Canyon. What we see here are depictions of supernatural creatures coming directly out of the spiral and manifesting themselves in our reality. Over and over again, we see the same imagery carved into the walls. Literal monsters emerging from these spirals, and oftentimes you can see they are still connected to the spiral, and other times they're standing right next to it. You also see images of humans getting sucked into the spiral upside down, and on the other side emerges a monster. This is a common theme throughout the canyon, and these depictions can be found at numerous petroglyph sites in Chaco Canyon, and they all seem to be telling us the same exact story. During our investigation of the canyon, we came across several interesting petroglyphs, depictions of monsters, dragons, gray aliens, and weird-looking beings. But I never found what I was looking for. We searched the entire park for the 6-toed footprints of the Nephilim giants. These footprints have been documented numerous times by mainstream publications, yet they're nowhere to be found. I started to wonder, maybe they're hiding the footprints. So I decided to stop a park ranger and ask him. The conversation went a little bit like this. "Oh, excuse me, sir. Can I ask you a quick question?" And the ranger replies, "Yes, absolutely. What can I help you find?" "I'm looking for these 6-toed footprints that were carved in the canyon wall behind Casa Bonita. Do you know where those are?" The ranger says, "Ah, yes, those footprints. They're located in an off-limits area. Unfortunately, we closed it off to the public." Closed to the public. Makes you wonder what else they have closed off to the public. And as we were about to leave the park, we decided to go and watch the 30-minute video inside the visitor center. And what we saw was shocking. They showed us petroglyphs from inside the park like no other we have ever seen. Perfectly clear images of interdimensional beings with pyramids stacked on top of their head. We walked through the entire park and did not see these petroglyphs. So it made me wonder, where are these petroglyphs and what else are they hiding from us? In 1999, an anthropologist working for the University of Utah published a book entitled Man-Corn: Cannibalism and Violence in the Prehistoric American Southwest. The term man-corn is the literal translation of the Aztec word tiactalui, which refers to a, quote, sacred meal of sacrificed human meat cooked with corn. In Turner's book, they provide evidence of cannibalism in 72 ancient Anasazi sites, including Chaco Canyon. Forensic evaluations of bones found at these sites proves they were cannibalized. But the question is by whom? Who were eating the Anasazi? After the collapse of Chaco Canyon, around 1150 AD, the remaining members of the Anasazi spread out and separated. They moved deep into remote canyons and started building their new dwellings high up on cliff faces or on highly fortified mesas. To archaeologists, it's as if the Anasazi were overtaken by some strange paranoia, hiding from some terrible enemy, but no matter how hard they looked, no enemy was found. Or was it?
And keeping in mind that these legends materialized globally at approximately the same time, it's more likely than not, in my opinion, that the universal story agrees with the record of every major culture of the ancient world in which the astonishingly consistent story is told of gods that descended from heaven and or came through spiral vortices to materialize in bodies of flesh. From Rome to Greece, and before that to Egypt, Persia, Assyria, Babylonia, Sumer, the earliest records of civilization tell of the era when powerful beings known to the Hebrews as watchers, and in the book of Genesis as the Bnei Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, mingled themselves with humans, giving birth to part celestial, part terrestrial hybrids known as Nephilim. The Bible says this happened when men began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, when the sons of God saw the women's beauty, and they took wives from among them to sire their unusual offspring. I believe a record of this first incursion of hybrid humans and six-toed giants is recorded in Genesis 6:4, when it says there were giants in the earth in those days. That's the first incursion before the flood. And also after that, that is after the flood, the second incursion, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown.